finish our discussion of value at risk, I want to talk a little bit about some applications. We've actually seen some of these. So the first one is comparison of portfolios. So VaR, value at risk, can be used to compare the riskiness of two portfolios. One would typically say if a portfolio has a greater value at risk, then it's a riskier portfolio. And this solves, or at least partially solves, one of the challenges in portfolios that include derivatives. So one of the standard tools of finance, expected return and standard deviation of return, no longer works. And we've seen that with these distributions that are a little bit strange. If you think about holding an option position until maturity, we can have a very large probability that we lose the entire investment. And the simple measure of standard deviation of our return doesn't adequately describe that. So value at risk can be used for portfolio comparisons. Now, this is not a perfect measure, and there are plenty of portfolios that I can find which have very, very low values at risk, but lots of risk. For example, if one sells options which have a very low probability of being exercised, then that will have a very low value at risk. In fact, we can find options which have any probability of exercise we want. So for example, let's say we measure our value at risk as a one-day 95th percentile value at risk. And we choose options to sell options which can be exercised about 1% of the time. Well, 99% of the time they aren't exercised. We've sold these options. 99% of the time the options aren't exercised. So the 95th percentile value at risk is 0. We never lose any money. That, of course, is a very risky portfolio, but it never loses money according to the value at risk, and so value at risk looks good. Another application is risk aggregation. We've seen this as well. One of the questions we hit reasonably quickly in a derivatives portfolio is how to add a risk to the underlying asset, a delta or a delta and a gamma, and the vega, the risk that the volatility changes. We can measure these risks using our Greeks, but how do we add them? How much risk do we have with a combined delta, gamma, and vega position? So value at risk allows me to aggregate risk either across factors or perhaps portfolios. I might have two portfolios and I don't know how the risk in one portfolio either adds to the risk from a different portfolio or those two portfolios offset. I can use my value at risk technique to think about that. We used this in a trading operation. For example, if I'm a senior manager on a trading desk, I might have lots of individual traders. Those individual traders might have individual value at risk limits. And I, as the senior manager, might have a value at risk limit for the entire business. And now, depending on how my traders behave, the value at risk across each individual portfolio, if they're all taking similar kinds of risks in similar sizes, that's going to add. They're going to be additive. On the other hand, you might have one trader who's trading one kind of risk and another trader who's trading another kind of risk, and those two things offset, and thus the value at risk at my trading desk level, at my trading management level, is lower than it might have otherwise been if I just simply added value at risk across desks. Capital allocation. For simple derivatives, a futures position, it's difficult to know how much capital to allocate to the position. For example, if we enter into a futures position, we are required to post initial margin. But we've already seen how much capital should we allocate to this trade? How much money should we put aside because we have this position? We can use value at risk to investigate this position. Perhaps we might calculate a 99th percentile one-day value at risk and allocate that much capital to be sure that only 1 in 100 days do we run out of money. But of course that depends on how big our position is, how long we might run that position, and so on. So this value at risk, this concept of value at risk can be used to think about how much capital do I need for a position. Client reporting is an important usage of value at risk. If I'm managing a fund, a hedge fund, or just a simple mutual fund, my clients might want to know my value at risk. And they might want to know this for a couple of reasons. One, how much risk am I taking? Value at risk is an objective measure, and I can report my 95th percentile one-day value at risk, and that can be used to compare my fund to somebody else's. There's another reason, though, why a client might want to see my value at risk. They want to know if I have the systems, technology, and controls in place to carry out a complex calculation such as value at risk. This gives them comfort about my ability to operate and manage risk. When I worked in a hedge fund, my clients knew that value at risk might not be a very good measure of how much risk the hedge fund was taking. So this first reason they wanted it was not valid for those clients. On the other hand, they wanted to know that we could calculate value at risk because that gave them confidence in our risk management process, our trade capture system, our valuation systems, and so on. The fact that we could simply calculate this gave them comfort in our business model. There's also a regulatory reporting aspect. Bank regulators require the reporting of value at risk on a regular basis and a consistent basis across banks. They use this to compare the riskiness of different institutions. If I am Bank A with a certain amount of capital and a very large value at risk versus Bank B with the same amount of capital but a very small value at risk, they might look at me and infer that I am taking more risk, and thus they need to be more careful about managing me, about regulating my bank. They also want to know, just like the clients, they want to know the quality of my bank, of the bank's infrastructure, how easily we can produce the value at risk numbers. Do we have problems? Do the numbers appear late? Do we have the staff who can explain how it works? And so they look to the value at risk calculation as a measure of quality of the bank's infrastructure. So these are all reasons why value at risk, while not perfect, are a good measure for the riskiness of a portfolio and a good thing for banks and other funds to be able to calculate.